Today I want to talk about perspective drawing and how I would study it using two amazing books, How to Draw by Scott Robertson and Thomas Bertling, and Frame Perspective 1 by Marcos Mateo Mestre. Both books have a lot of the same concepts, but explained in different ways. And they also have very specific parts that each complement each other. Frame Perspective 1 focuses more on practical approach, talks about 3 points, talked about inclined planes and auxiliary vanishing points, and a lot of stuff that How to Draw doesn't. But How to Draw goes deeper into complex volumes, as well as applying them to real-world objects, aircraft, and so on and so forth. How to Draw tends to be a little drier, so if you only have budget to study from one book, please do focus on Frame Perspective. In my opinion, I think it's going to be more approachable and easier to digest, and then you can later on dive in to Scott's book that is really amazing. The side of draw through that we're going to talk about here today, you only get from diving deeper using Scott's book, and he has a lot of examples. You can see a lot of correlations with courses out there from the best schools out there, FZD, Brainstorm School, Art Center, College of Design, and so on. I have done reviews on both books, so I'll have both links in the description. But before we go ahead to the 6-part structure and divided into steps that I did, I want to discuss briefly the table of contents of both books together and understand a little bit of the structure that we're going to be looking at. Both books are going to discuss basics, so what's a horizon line, what's a line of sight, cone of vision, and so on. Then Marcos jumps right in to 1 point, 2 point, and 3 point, and finally multiple and inclined planes, so auxiliary vanishing points. Scott Robertson will go into materials first to go back a little bit, then more on the formal terminology that is correlated to the other book, but then to tools. A lot of tools that are going to be taught by Marcos throughout the discussion of different setups of points, but here he focuses mostly on them. So mirroring and using simple rectangles or simple planes in perspective to really understand these basic tools of using diagonals and so on that are going to be so important later on. Then he jumps into grids that has a lot of conversations with what's going on here. And ellipses. Ellipses is the bending the line, chapter 8, here on Marcos' book. Marcos then goes into elevation plan view. I love the process of thinking in plan view, and there is a little bit of that in How to Draw's book in chapter 7, talking about environments. And I have talked about this in a video about drawing around the house, so basic, simple rooms. And it's really important to understand and plan on a top view of your of that scene, of that place. Architecture uses that a lot, and there is a lot of to be learned here. I don't like, to be honest, and that's my personal opinion as a teacher to have taught this for a lot of students over a few years. So I don't like the approach. It's very, very dry and technical of translating a plan view into perspective. So there are a little bit of rules that you are always in doubt if you're making the right thing, and 1 point and 2 point have different approaches and so on. So I would encourage not going too deep into this kind of thing. If we need to transfer real proportions in perspective nowadays, or real measurements, we definitely can use 3D and a lot of other tools that are going to make a big difference. And then going into lenses, that Scott talks a little bit as well. And finally, Scott goes into volumes and real-world objects, as well as a little bit of experimentation with mediums, different mediums and processes. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in part 5 of this discussion. And Marcos Mateus go into more of a freehand drawing and sketching techniques. Some of the things that have been discussed here in the materials part and warm-up part from Scott. So I would highly recommend starting with chapter 11. It also goes into a lot of discussions of observational drawing. So that's really interesting, and that I think it's really helpful for studying perspective, learning to see before you go into a lot of the concepts that we're going to be talking about. And finally, notes on composition. So I'll touch on that briefly in part 6. But without further ado, let's jump right in. Part 1 is all about learning to see, as I said before, understanding what materials you're going to work with and getting comfortable with them. Some people have asked me in the past how long should they stay doing like line exercises, vertical lines, horizontals, connecting dots, and so on. It's not about how long. It's individual. I would encourage doing that for a week tops, and then going back regularly to them. There is one foundation group tutorial that I have talked about in other videos that John Park, one of the best artists out there in the entertainment industry, does a lot of exercises to warm up before going into the tutorial. So it's great to see that all of those you will come back. If you stay too long without drawing, you will need to get your line better once again. It's about sharpening your skills, and you will come back most of the time. It's also about basic concepts and tools. So starting out with observation, I love this content by Marshall Vandroof. I don't know how long it will stay online, but it's still online. I'll add a link here if that's still there. But basically, he talks about a lot of things, angles, the importance of reading those angles, but especially learning to see, and that all the lines, the converging lines, the going to the vanishing points or auxiliary vanishing points, you need to have a feel for how much they are, how fast they are converging, how fast their inclination is changing. So that is, in my opinion, all about learning to see and have a grasp of the difference between verticals, horizontals, and all different angles on what you're drawing. That will go a long way helping your observational drawing as well when you get out on the street, or when you are drawing your room or around the house, as I talked before. It will be really helpful. Even in drawing people and more organic things, understanding angles and breaking those down, as in the Charles Bard kind of method, will really be helpful. In the material side, there are lots of content out there. Scott Robertson has a lot of them. I love this one talking about calligraphy and typography and how that can help you really improve your craft and have a better sense of design. Also, FZD has this exercise. You can see that it's pretty small, but it's all about letters. So drawing fonts and getting used to the material that you're using. Practicing some ellipses, and you will see that on Peter Huhn's course or book, Dynamic Bible, Dynamic Sketching courses. A lot of visual communication courses will also have this kind of same exercise. Modern Day James here, as well as Marcos Mateo Mestre's book, Frame Drawing Techniques. He goes into a lot of details of pens, pencils, digital, and so on. So it's very interesting to see the differences and how can you bring some of the best traits from each one of those. The concepts, basic concepts and tools, I have highlighted here the pages and the chapters. So take your time going through those. Once again, it's not about mastering everything, as we're going to see in part 2 that dives deeper into 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, and so on. It's not about mastering. It's about understanding what's there. It's about understanding that diagonals will go a long way helping you grid out a room, a drawing that you're making in perspective, and that will help build up a lot of complex shapes and volumes once you have the grasp of that. So go through the content. It's gonna be a little drier. If you haven't studied anything in perspective, it's gonna be harder. I'm gonna talk about later on about Eric Olson and his course on New Masters Academy. I learned a lot from it. It's technical to some extent, but I come from an engineering background, so that helped me a lot. It will depend on yourself, how you learn best, what kind of topics you learn best. So don't stay and don't get bummed out if you get to a point and you don't understand a topic. Go forward, try learning more stuff, and then go back and having a better grasp of everything. Jumping into part 2, as I said before, it's all about 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, and inclined planes. So basically, all the technical information, it's gonna be here on those pages. So talking about 1 point, and having some examples, talking about 2 points, and how turning something around will change the set and the angles of the vanishing lines, 90-degree angles in plan view, how they relate to perspective. A lot of this stuff is going to be really important, but I think the most important here is understanding the relationship between 2 or 3 vanishing points, how far away they should be depending on the type of lenses that you're using. That's why lenses is here as well, getting a little bit farther away in the books, but bringing some of that perspective here as well. Multiple vanishing points will really help you sharpen your skills in visual perception, in understanding how different sets of vanishing points work together. So if you turn a little bit, where the vanishing point that is on the page will go, and what about the one that is outside of your page, as we can see right here. A great exercise for doing that is drawing books on top of each other in different rotations. It's really helpful to understand vanishing points, and doing that from different angles, doing that from different heights, sometimes sitting down, sometimes standing up. It will be really helpful. As I said before, Eric Olson taught me most of what I know. If you look at my video on drawing learning perspective, my sketchbook tour, you'll definitely see a lot of the diagrams that Eric Olson puts there. He learned a lot from Gary Meyer, so Gnomon DVDs are really great. And some of the tutorials that I have talked about in previous videos are going to be really important here. I want to highlight this one. That is the first one that I talk about in the video about drawing for concept art. So it's really, really good on understanding grids and having the basics of construction and how to use primitive shapes to build complex environments. So that will definitely go a long way. And then inclined planes, it's interesting to draw like roofs, stairs, and all of that. I have a bias here because I really love drawing staircases and all of that. So I really enjoyed this part. So inclined planes, you definitely, if you are like me, you have a lot of fun doing that and doing some of those exercises. Now that you have understood your basic concepts and your materials, you're starting out drawing a little bit, you have gone through all the different setups in perspective, it's time to really start practicing a lot. So construction now of basic shapes is going to be really important. ellipses are going to be really hard. I can't lie about this. And dynamic sketching, it's all about those basics. And now you're going to have a better grasp, a better perspective sense of how to build something that looks three-dimensional and keep that three-dimensionality when you're adding details as well. So starting out with the simple stuff, Scott Robertson's DVDs are also great, but you have a lot of videos on how to draw of him doing like this kind of arches in perspective, mirroring, as well as using two curve combos and situations where you can construct simple volumes that have a little bit of complexity there. You can also do this kind of isometric studies. I'm going to zoom in here, that are going to be really important for understanding the grids and how many squares each part will take. So you can see here a top view, a side view, and a front view of the same object, and how can you translate that to perspective or isometric view. This is a very common exercise in product design school, but you normally do that in an isometric view, but you can definitely do that in a simple perspective grid, even if you need to plot out your vanishing points and see where they are in the scene. The same here, same exercise from brainstorm school, but looking at the same object from different sides. And you can see that they are simple boxes or inclined planes. You don't even need to think about the auxiliary vanishing points and so on. They are going to work, so you have conversion here in those points, but you don't need to worry about them. If you do everything right with the gridding and using a lot of the boxes in perspective, you can just cut them later on and have this volume be constructed. So really interesting exercises. Ellipses, as I said before, are going to be hard. I think this is the best exercise I ever done, putting an ellipse inside this kind of corner in perspective. Scott Robertson goes really deep into this and gives a lot of examples, constructs in video as well. So it's really, really good. And I love this chart here that shows that when you're looking in a top view, every circle is the same, but you will have different angles looking at them, and that will tell us the degree of the ellipse, how flat it's going to be or how round it's going to be, all the way to when you're looking down to your feet, it's going to be a circle. That's also hard to grasp, especially when you're looking at things in different angles. So I highly recommend studying from objects, studying from bottles, glasses, wheels, tires, barrels. A lot of that will be really helpful from observation, understanding the relationship between ellipses and the horizon line. It's super helpful. Transferring side views into perspective, we'll use a lot of the exercise that I mentioned. So understanding the first and finding the first ellipse that will help you find the first square. That's the big deal here, because all circles are surrounded by squares. And so constructing cubes in perspective without all the measurements will go easier. Will go easily if you get the ellipses right in perspective. So a lot of car wheels and wheel bases. Also, you can start drawing those. More like two curve combos and getting more complex with your volumes. This is an exercise from Scott, as well as this one from FZD, but you can find the same exercises at Brainstorm School as well. All good perspective drawing will go through this, and this is the part that I said that Marcos Mateo doesn't cover that much. He goes more into grids and construction of scenes, because he's not a product designer, he's a layout artist, so he uses more of that side. But this goes a long way in giving you a sense of draw through, as I said, and understanding how things turn and what's the perspective in the side of objects that you can't see. So this kind of constructions here, dynamic sketching, these are tutorials, they can get really easier to do if you understand what's on the other side. The relationship between the center line and symmetry, this is really important, and you will only have a grasp of that if you do a lot of this kind of exercises. So I highly encourage doing a lot here and getting a grasp of this kind of construction before moving forward. So yeah, now we are over the dry stuff. We have practiced on part 3. We have practiced a lot of construction, and now we have a way better perspective understanding, as well as visual perception grasp of vanishing lines and how vanishing points correlate in the construction. Now we can really dive deeper into real stuff. Organic forms, basic design concepts, so side view design, relationship, proportions, as well as practicing a lot of the concepts that we had before and in real things. So I highly recommend foundation group tutorials. I have a video on that as well. I've talked about each one of them and what they can bring to you. So this is the part where taking some of this, you don't need to go through all of them, but some of them will be really helpful. And one really important tutorial that I want to highlight here is this one by John Park, using 3D as a basis. I think 3D is also an interesting learning tool, but it can get you confused. If you have a better understanding of 3D, please do use that for studying the rest of the concepts that we've seen before. Even from the first part, if we go back to part 1, understanding the basic concepts and what a cone of vision looks like. But really important here, understanding one point and making different setups and making different cameras with different lenses. I talked about the example of books. You can do this in 3D also, and copy that and study on top of that as well. That is another great exercise. And if we look at what John Park has here, I'm going to just zoom in really quickly. He uses a very simple basis to draw on top. That's also another exercise that will be really, really helpful for getting a grasp of the details in perspective. Drawing volumes was part 1 of this, and now real world objects. You can use cylinders, all primitive shapes, sphere, cone, box, and so on, to block out a scene, as we saw in that other tutorial. This is the continuation of that, and really diving deeper into the details so that you can really practice and learn more about and rely less on construction and more on what you know and what you feel is right. There's another example here, also using some 3D primitives for basic sketching. So really practice that out before going forward. And as you can see, the dry part of Scott Robertson's book, we haven't we didn't get to that yet. It's going to be part 5. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about next. These parts of how to draw, as well as frame perspective, are going to be some of the harder concepts to grasp. So cuts, ellipses, dividing ellipses, and using some of the tricks that Scott Robertson teaches us. But when you get to complex volumes, it will open a lot of possibilities as well, especially in vehicle design. So if you're into drawing vehicles in complex shapes and complex even bottles and objects and all of that, furniture, set design, and this kind of stuff, this is going to be really important. So getting more complex with your volumes, simple boats will be an easier, or submarines will be an easier first step into this part. Harder and harder and more complex cars and different vehicles. The rounder they are, the harder they are. So getting to draw more squared cars will be really helpful in the beginning. And then you start using some of the like dividing lines here, like John Park did with the ellipses, as well as the wheels here, those kind of divisions, and having that be believable in perspective, it's harder to draw. You can see the same here in the motorcycle design, as well as motorcycle design by Scott Robertson. It's also an interesting time to talk about lines. Scott Robertson has a great tutorial in some videos in his channel here on line quality, line weight, and how that can make your drawing better. So this is the time to really be mindful of that and ask yourself to do a better line. So you have a lot of examples here, both from tutorials as well as drawings by Scott and by John Park. You can draw trucks, you can draw complex working machines, you can draw aircraft, you can draw a lot of stuff. In terms of complementary books that are really helpful, I would recommend H Point. It's one of the best books I ever seen on learning everything about product design for a car. So ergonomy, the anatomy of a car, and so on and so forth, as well as Mechanica for drawing like spaceships and robots. Doug Cheng is one of the biggest names currently in the Star Wars design for Star Wars franchise, creative director, if I'm not mistaken. So we will learn a lot about process and great eye for quality, detail versus breathing areas, some of the basic design concepts that we've seen before, but in more complex objects and vehicles. And finally, and if you are not into vehicles and complex objects, I would potentially recommend that you come straight to this part and then later on get back to all those. Having a strict curriculum and following that, I think will go really a long way down the line. If you have to do some way more complex drawings like this by Evan and understanding perspective and complex shapes will be really helpful when you need to have symmetry in an armor, a design, or something like that. So I highly recommend going through part 5, but if it's too dry for you or you don't enjoy the topics and so on, please jump ahead. This is the point where I would go back to observation drawing as well, going out and looking at the world more and more. So this is a little bit of a review on this side, but also the time to use all we've learned from organic forms, cylinders, ellipses, to start constructing figures. The more foreshortening you have, the harder it will get. So the construction needs to be underlying there. Andrew Loomis is a great source of information here, as well as Marcos Mateo Mestre. A lot of tutorials as well in drawing animals, heads. This is the time where all that you have learned in terms of perspective, construction, and simple volumes will really be helpful when you're drawing figures. go deeper into 3D, go deeper into composition. So the last chapter from Marco's book goes into more composition. I highly recommend Edgar Payne here for that, and doing more complex environments. All the links to tutorials are going to be in the description as well. And finally, I would highly suggest Skillful Huntsman as a next step in your studies. Skillful Huntsman goes over the whole process of world building, covering characters, environments, vehicles, objects, props, and so on for a short story. So that will also be a great book. I haven't done a review on the book, but potentially when you're watching this, the review is going to be out and in my channel. So I hope this was really informative and helped excite you for your studies. I know the content can be a little dry, but I tried to make it more approachable and giving this kind of step-by-step structure. So just looking back really quickly, we have now we understand like observation basic skills, our materials, the basic concepts of perspective, all the setups and different setups, including different lenses. So if you're gonna draw like Kim Jung-gi using more of a fisheye lens, now you understand how that makes sense. It's hard to draw like that, but at least you understand the basics and the concepts behind it. Construction of all types of different shapes and volumes, and simple to complex vehicles, objects, and so on. Going deeper into all different topics and really practicing. The problem in my way of approaching this, and I have talked about this in my sketchbook tour, Learning Perspective, is that I didn't go to part 4. I stopped in parts 1, 2, 3. I jumped a little bit into part 5, but I didn't go deep into part 4. That's why it's here. Apply the grids. Apply the grids. Learn basic design, draw from imagination, and all of that. This is a very important part that it's not on the book. You have some pages here, transferring scales, but they go through that really fast. I would stay way longer here, understanding the difference that drawing a window in scale in a house that is like 5 blocks away will make a big difference in the believability of what you're doing, how you're working, and as well as like freeing yourself more to draw without construction and more with visual perception. And then volumes, applying, learning more design content, vehicle design, ergonomy, anatomy of different vehicles, all the way to figures, character design, and composition, world building. Everything will use the basis of perspective, but you will get less and less into perspective topics and more using that as something that is ingrained in your knowledge, your visual perception. So I wish you the best in your studies. I would love to talk about that in the comments below more if you have any questions as well. And if you enjoyed this content, you will potentially enjoy the same guide I did for studying color and light, the book by James Gurney, into 6 parts and all of that. So definitely check that out. I hope you all have a great day, and I hope to see you in a different video down the line. Have a great one.